Everyone hear me? Cool. I'm from the Coalition for Educational Justice, and CEJ, as we're called, is a parent-led coalition in New York City across all 5 boroughs. So each one of our coalition partners are a community-based organization working primarily in low-income communities of color, working across issue areas, but we come together under the banner of CEJ to talk about education issues. And at the core of it, we do a lot of work with parents specifically and community members around not just educating parents about what's happening in the education system and in the ecosphere, but also developing their capacity around organizing, around advocacy, and also for pushing for systemic changes, right? So a lot of the work we do is, some of it is how do you work within a school setting, but it's also what are the things to ask teachers. We do a lot of those types of trainings, but it's also about how do we use our collective voice and power to push back against the system that policies tend to be, that have really bad outcomes for our children, whether it's race-based, socio-economic-based, whatever the issues are, and whatever the outcomes are, how do we push back against those things? How do we push back? And so when CEJ started around 10 years ago, a lot of our work was, what is it that we want to see for our education system? If we could close our eyes and really envision an education, school, what would it look like? And a lot of that work was, we want our students to have a college-going culture. We want all of our students to come out college and career ready. We want a welcoming environment for ourselves. We want parent engagement, not involvement, but really to be engaged and to be viewed and treated as partners. We want teaching and learning. We want actual learning happening in our classrooms. And we want wraparound services. We want to have access to services that we know that we need, but maybe sometimes that we don't often know that we need. And lo and behold, that there was something like that already happening, and it was community schools. And so a lot of the work that we've done has been around educating parents, educating a base around what community schools are, but also in a lot of ways transforming what community schools can be and should be. So a lot of times there's a lot of talk around services, there's a lot of talk around the gaps around what parents can provide, there's a lot of talk around how do we fix the home, right? But there's not a lot of talk about what's happening in the classroom, because at the end of the day it's still a school. And so Becky has new glasses and that's great, but if she cannot read, it was for naught. Johnny has braces and he's gonna have $1 million smile, but he can't do long division, so it was for naught. So a lot of that is really trying to elevate the academic piece, because we still need students to come out educated and being able to take part fully in the democratic process and really be, because that's where the equity is. The equity is in the services, it's in the resources, but there's 2 prongs to the equity argument around education and community schools. There's an argument around access to resources, access to services, which is great. But part of that problem is when we view families as deficits, we give charity. And there's nothing wrong. If you need a new winter coat because you don't have one in your coat, there's nothing wrong with going to a coat drop to get a coat. But you should not walk into that room and feel shamed as you get a coat. And that's the difference. Right? So there's a real shift around that resource and access piece, but there's an educational equity problem in this country and in the classrooms. Students do not have access to the same level of teaching and learning across demographics. And that is a big issue. So it is great when we talk about having access to resources, being able to align those resources, because that needs to happen. Because community schools really is a way to leverage the resources at a systems level that reallocates them so that students, families, and communities now have full access. and can fully participate. But if we don't get this educational equity thing right, if we do not address what's happening in the classrooms, what's happening with those the school leadership, making sure that we have those quality things happening, that they have access to rich and dynamic curriculum. Books. Students go without books, right? Without libraries. You cannot talk about community schools and equity if students do not have a book. If I can't read Tuck Everlasting, like you read Tuck Everlasting, then you have, but we can both get mental health services, we still don't have equity. So, and that's a lot of the work that we do with parents, and around organizing parents and communities to be able to push back when the talk is just around services, when it's just around what we can give a community, versus how do we leverage the knowledge that's in the community already? How do we leverage the knowledge of parents that are already at the table? How do we leverage the knowledge of a community that has been in place for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and because we now have a newfangled idea, right? So it's a lot of that work. And so, excuse me. So what we've been doing going forward is really working with the Department of Education and with City Hall, because 128 new community schools are in the pipeline. They're in the works. And so how do we get in the front line and talk about transformative parent engagement? And what does that mean? What does that mean to truly engage parents, families, community members, students? What does that look like? How can that be transformative, not just for a single student or family, but for the school? And then outside the school for the entire community. Because if I can give you advocacy skills, advocacy skills are transferable skills. So if I can give you the advocacy skills, now we can discuss how do we transfer those skills around the table. And really having these strong conversations around parents as experts, as partners, and as leaders. And not just the talk where we say that, like not just where we say, yeah, parents are experts, and then we go in the other room, and then people have conversations without us. No, really being sure that parents are at that table to make those decisions, because we all come to the table with a different set of knowledges and different set of skills, but they're all equally valuable.
Natasha, can I pick up on that point? Because I think you and others have mentioned this too, that it really gets to the core of the equity issue, particularly in rural, remote places. Having a highly qualified, competent, content-rich, professionally developed strategy support for teachers. There's a legal case, the Ninth Circuit, the Renee V. Duncan case, around the fact that, quite frankly, most of the underprepared, under-supported teachers in training are in front of children of color and children who are poor. And the Coalition for Teaching Quality, Kevin Lindsay at First Focus is the co-chair of the Coalition for Teaching Quality that many of you have heard of. Civil rights groups, advocacy groups, across the spectrum at the local, state, and federal level know that at the heart of exactly what you're talking about is the fact that if we don't have competent, qualified, supported teachers who are well compensated and have networks that can lead and guide them as they grow in their profession. So this is a critical point that we all, I think, would agree with. That when we look at staffing schools, that's where we need to really make sure we have the best teachers in front of our kids. I want to thank you all. I know that our time is a little tight. I think we're adjourning at 2 o'clock, and I know that Marty probably has some closing comments. But questions, comments from the floor, please. Yes.
I'm Sarah Pickup with the National Summer Learning Association. And I'll try to be quick, but even though we know schools are very unequal in terms of their quality, they still represent an equalizing factor when compared with the summer months, right? So all kids, because of access to school, have books, they have meals, they have adults, they have structured activities, even if those schools are of varying quality. So in the summer months, many kids lose access to all of those things. And we know from national data that about a third of kids are enrolled in a summer learning program, two-thirds of kids are not. And most school districts serve fewer than 10% of their kids in the summer, but they are the largest providers of summer learning programs. And something that we've seen is there's this overwhelming need. So there's, at least two-thirds of kids in those certain districts that don't have a summer program to go to. So districts are faced with these incredibly tough choices of who to offer programs to in the summer, knowing that almost all of their kids need them. So here in DC 2 years ago, they decided instead of kind of offering a first come first serve program to all kids, they were only going to offer their program to kids scoring at the level 2 on the standardized test. So not the kids at level 1 who are the furthest behind, and not the kids that still might not be proficient but are closer, but just this level 2 band. Because they thought this is who we can serve best in a 6-week program. There was tremendous public outcry and outrage over that decision, and they ended up backpedaling from it. But it sort of strikes me, and I was reading in the headlines about the Florida State Board of Ed setting goals for reading based on race this week. They're already being sued like 3 days later. But what do you do when you're in that situation, if anybody has any perspective on when there's such overwhelming need and you have to make a resource decision? How do you battle what will ultimately be a sort of public response to that decision? I have no idea who to ask that to.
Who'd like to pick that up?
I'll start it. I think, one, you're absolutely right. Yep, summer. And we're a big proponent of summer academies, not just summer school. Summer academies where you are able to give that extra instruction or just supplement instruction or really just have really structured time with students. But part of the problem is when you make decisions in silos and no one understands why you made a decision, and I'm a mom and my son just scored at 1, I want my son to do better, so I'm going to be pissed. Or my child scored at the 4 or at the 3 or whatever, but I know that my child is struggling with fractions and next year is all about fractions, I'm going to be a little pissed. So that's the reason why we can't continue to make decisions in silos without parents and community members. Because when you don't have those voices, you don't understand that my soul is scared. When the new standard came down and my son took that test, I was in tears constantly until I got those results. I rode him like a dog for no reason. Because my soul was scared. So that's the pushback. And when we do things in silos, people's souls are going to come for you.
Anything else?